Hello all. I want to make a video tonight about how we choose a martial art that is effective for us. What considerations really matter as opposed to the whole notion of this art is better than that art. You will find that if you understand on a professional level training for your self-protection and preservation, that it is a very limited perspective to think about martial arts with respect to better or worse. Instead, what you want to look at are the relative benefits and liabilities involved with practicing with a specific approach, and always, always, always take and modify to what your needs with what you are studying are. For example, it's a general sort of understanding that going to the ground is not a good thing in a real situation. And that if you study an art that is focused on gaining position first and going to the ground, you're going to have some limitations with certain scenarios, multiple opponents, weapons, etc. But let's say you're a woman. Women have a lot of strength in their legs and hips. So studying an art like Gracie Jiu Jitsu is playing to that strength, okay? And the situations that a woman has to deal with regarding self-preservation are different than what a man has to deal with. So for example, getting raped is something that often involves a man trying to take a woman to the ground and trying to fight with a woman to control her, as opposed to, as men, fighting where you have to more, your larger concern is getting kicked in the head, multiple opponents, being hurt because you're going to the ground, which is something that could happen to anybody. But a woman may very well take that trade off and say, well, it's not the greatest thing to go to the ground necessarily. However, given what I have to deal with for my self protection, this gives me certain advantages in a most likely scenario that I would find myself in. And I think that's a very intelligent way to approach your training. It's not only women, but for example, if you are a soldier, your primary goal inevitably will have to be getting access to your weapons. That should reflect on what you choose and how you study what you choose, not simply this martial art is better than that martial art. It's also interesting because once you start to look at things this way and you practice with this in mind, you will begin to understand why things were done a certain way. So, for example, let's say you are a woman, you studied Gracie Jiu Jitsu many years, and you want to kind of refine your game and your stand up, and you want to make your Jiu Jitsu deadly so that you don't have to set up a technique and frame it on the ground, gain position first. What you will inevitably do and what it will look like would be classical Jiu Jitsu. Okay? And this tells us, it gives us an understanding and an appreciation for how these martial arts evolved in the first place. Okay? It's not always self-evident. For example, the footwork that you see in Southeast Asian martial arts, why you come in at a certain triangular angle when you're doing an entrance, where your distance and timing is, why it's that way. But the more you actually look at martial arts towards your own interests, if you're involved in interests that mean that there's a likelihood you'll have to use your art, you will begin to appreciate classical martial arts anyway. It's just an interesting aside. Um, But this principle, it should be the grounding idea for how you go about choosing what art to study. It shouldn't be a question of this particular art so much as, for example, going to people who have skill sets of a particular kind. That's always a good thing. You learn that skill set. Okay, then you apply it the way that you want to. So instead of saying, for example, I like or I don't like Wing Chun, okay, you can have Wing Chun instructors that are god awful, okay? But there are guys, for example, when I was teaching in Chinatown in San Francisco, there were guys that really were good in Wing Chun, okay? And you don't necessarily have to endorse the whole art, but some of the things that they could do with hitting, okay, were spectacular. And going and studying that as a specialist, a professional of some sort, behooves you. It's a good approach. Okay, so you don't have to just do Wing Chun. Same thing, for example, people who have really good understanding of weapons and defenses. It makes a little bit more sense that way, but it's the same idea. So instead of studying an art per se, study the particulars and study people who have refined those techniques to a degree where they are excellent and capable. And you'll begin to see that that combination will put you as a very effective individual, a very effective practitioner. It's actually, I can speak to you from experience. I came up fighting, doing karate, and it was a great experience. One day I realized I knew nothing about weapons. So I went and I learned about weapons. And that specialization, it was taught to me by people who were much more gifted in those areas than the people that I had trained with, because in karate, essentially, your body is a weapon. That's the whole idea. You know, you hit things to break them, one shot. Um, so we've come to a point where people think if they study a comprehensive martial art in the ring, that will give them what they need. And I would say to you that, again, there's nothing absolute here, okay? If you need to get smacked around, learn how to smack people around, don't understand what it's like to get smacked in the mouth so you can taste it and see chrome bubbles, getting choked out, etc., then yeah, you do that for a while and do it for that reason primarily. With the understanding that once you understand that experience, there are other avenues to train in, to refine and make better, but most important, to make more useful for you. Because the better you get, the more you learn how to take these things and make them work for you. As a bouncer, using martial arts is very much that way. Probably the best pure martial art for a bouncer, based on the techniques that people need, is Aikido. Believe it or not. Think about it. I may be a great ground fighter, but as a bouncer, you don't want to do that. Um, I may be a great boxer, but you know what happens to boxers in street fights if they get into enough of them? They break their hand inevitably. I've seen it happen a million times. Okay? So, this is the intelligent way. And when you do this, a wonderful thing happens. You begin to realize why things look the way they do and what people were trying to attain in these older systems. Because the older Bugai arts, the feudal arts of Japan, the military arts specifically, Bugai, they're fluid, they are reflexive, they involve whole body movements because when you're in adrenaline state, Okay, you do not have a lot of access to fine motor coordination. And when you train that way and you learn how to do things with proper habits reflexively, then when you start to develop your jiu-jitsu, for example, and you focus on things like chokes and breaks that are strikes at the same time, it looks almost like somebody who said, studying this Gracie Jiu-Jitsu stuff, I want to refine it a bit, and I want to lose the framing, and I want to lose having to set the technique up like you do when you fight for a sport, and I just want to go right into the technique using either kazushi or a tamiwaza, either unbalancing or hitting something really hard and smacking it to break it so you can set the person up for another technique. And you will have something that looks remarkably similar to classical martial arts. So think about this when you're training. And again, I always say to people, levels to the game.